Hello, everybody. This is Mrs. G's Story Time, and we are reading Treasures of the Snow by Patricia St. John with permission of Moody Publishing Company. And we are on Chapter 10, Lucien Makes a Friend. Just as the village supported Danny and did all they could to comfort him, they also shunned Lucien and did all they could to show how much they despised him. For a few days he was really tormented. The schoolmaster made a speech about him in school, showing everybody what a bully and coward he was. The children chased him out of the playground and threw mud at him. But they soon gave up and simply settled down to ignore him. When teams were picked, he always was left last, and then there was one extra single desk in the classroom which he had to sit in. Everybody else sat in pairs. Even the tiny children got out of his way, for their mothers had warned them not to have nothing to do with him. "He's a cruel bully and may harm you as he harmed little Danny Bernay," they said. And the little ones looked on him as some kind of monster and ran away whenever he came near them. Down at the village, the storekeepers handed over the things he bought without speaking to him. The milkman never chatted with him, and the grocer's wife never slipped trimmings of gingerbread into his hand as she did for the other children. They never spoke unkindly to him, they just took no notice of him. Lucien, who was too shy to try to do anything to make him like him, drifted into a lonely little world of his own. He walked to and from school alone. He shopped alone, and in the playground he usually played alone. It was not that the children would not have him, for children forgive and forget quickly. It was simply his shame that kept him from joining in. Always he saw their dislike of him in their faces and imagined they were thinking of Danny. And gradually he grew to be afraid of them, from the milkman right down to the youngest child in the school. Lucien himself was always thinking of Danny. The thought haunted him, and he longed to ask Annette what the doctors had said. But Annette had neither looked at him nor spoken to him since the day of the accident, and he dared not speak to her. At home his mother found him more silent and more hard-working, for he had suddenly discovered that only by hard work could he forget his loneliness. Instead of being lazy like he used to be, he started working very hard on the farm. His mother praised him loudly, and his sister became kinder, for she herself was a hard-working girl, and Lucien's laziness had always annoyed her greatly. There was one place, and one only, where Lucien was completely happy, and that was in the forest. Here the kindly trees shut him in, and the world that disliked him was shut out. Here Lucien fled whenever he had any spare time. Squatting against a tree trunk or a boulder, he would carve away at his little figures and forget everything else in the joy of carving. Sitting beneath the pine trees, he would feel the sun on his hair and hands as he worked. The peace and the beauty of the forest in early summer soothed and comforted him. High up on the borders of the forest there stood a small chalet where a very old man lived by himself. He'd retired there long ago and lived alone with his goats and his hens and his cat. He was a strange old man, and everyone in the village was afraid of him. He didn't come down to the village to shop very often, but when he did, the children ran away from him. They called him the old man of the mountain. Some said he was a miser. Some said he was hiding from the police. Others said he was crazy and bad. Whatever the reason, no one ever been inside his home, and no one ever passed that way after dark. Lucien had wandered further than usual up the mountain one half-holiday from school, and sat as usual, working hard on his carving. He was carving a squirrel, holding a nut between his paws, when he suddenly became aware of heavy breathing behind him. He turned quickly to see the old man of the mountain looking over his shoulder. He was certainly a terrifying sight. His huge, tangled gray beard covered his chest, and his hooked brown nose made him look like some fierce bird of prey. But as Lucien gazed up, startled, into his eyes, he noticed that they were bright and kind, full of interest, and he decided not to run away after all. Besides, his great loneliness made him less afraid than he would have been otherwise. This old man might be odd or even wicked, but at least he knew nothing about what Lucien had done. So he said, "Bonjour, monsieur," as boldly as he could, and waited to see what would happen. The old man put out a hand like a brown claw and picked up the little carved squirrel and examined it and turned it over several times and then remarked, "You carve well for a child. Who's your teacher?" "Monsieur, I have no teacher. I taught myself." "Then you yourself are a good teacher and you deserve proper tools. With a little training you might start to earn your living. This squirrel looks like it's almost as if it's real." "Monsieur, I have no tools, and I don't have the money to buy them." In reply, the old man beckoned him with his claw-like hand. Lucien, feeling like someone in a dream, got up and followed him through the dim woods. They climbed some way in silence until they came to the borders where the old man's tiny chalet stood. There was no outhouse except for a wooden barn where the hens roosted, and the goat shared the kitchen with the old man. So did the ginger cat who sat washing herself in the sunshine. The bedroom was also the hayloft, and the old man slept on sacks laid across the goat's winter food supply of hay. The kitchen and the living room were poorly but strangely furnished. There was a stove, a milking bucket, a stool, a table, one chair, and a cheese press. And all around the walls, out of the reach of the goat, were shelves covered with carved wooden figures. Some beautiful, some ugly, but all the work of a real artist. There were bears and cows, chamois and goats, St. Bernard dogs and squirrels. There were little men and women, gnomes, dwarfs, and dancing children. There were boxes with alpine flowers carved on the lids, and dishes with flowers carved around the rim. And best of all, there was a Noah's Ark with a stream of tiny animals marching in. Lucien could not take his eyes off it. He just stared and stared. "It's just a hobby of mine," said the old man. "They keep me company on winter evenings. Now, boy, if you come and visit me from time to time, I'll teach you how to use the tools." Lucien looked up eagerly. His whole face was alive, and he no longer looked ugly. "Did you say, monsieur," he asked hesitantly, "that perhaps I might soon earn my living?" "In time," said the old man. "Yes, I have a friend who sells woodcraft at a good price. He sells many of my little figures, but some I get fond of and prefer to keep. In a short time, he will start to sell your best work for you. You will do much better with my tools than your own knife." Still, Lucien gazed up at him. His heart was singing with thankfulness because this old man seemed to care for him and wanted to take interest in him. And here at last somebody whom he didn't need to be afraid of and who thought well of him. He grabbed hold of the old man's hand. "Oh, thank you, monsieur," he cried. "How very good are you to me." "Zit," said the old man. "I'm lonely and I have no friends. We can carve together." "And I too am lonely and have no friends," replied Lucien simply. Lucien walked home through the forest. His brain was full of ideas, but there was one big idea more important than all the others. He would make a Noah's Ark for Danny, like the old man had done, with dozens of tiny figures, lions and elephants, rabbits, camels, cows, and Mr. and Mrs. Noah. When it was quite perfect, he would walk around to the Bernays chalet and give it to Danny as a peace offering. Surely no one could give Danny a better present than that. And after that, perhaps they might even allow him to be just a tiny bit friendly with Danny. His heart beat fast at the very thought of it. For 2 whole hours he had been completely happy. His happiness lasted all the way through the forest until the trees parted and he saw the village below. Tomorrow he would have to go back to school, and tomorrow he would feel lonely and frightened again. But today he had found a friend. 3 times a week after school, Lucien bounded through the quiet pine forest and sat on the step of the old man's chalet and worked on his Noah's Ark. It was a wonderful thing to use tools with the sharp blades and easy curves, very different from his old penknife. The old man marveled at the boy's skill. The Noah's Ark family grew and grew, and every visit Lucien made, he thought of some new animal to carve, and the procession grew longer and longer. There was another excitement for Lucien just about then. An inspector came to school and set up a handcraft competition for the children. The girls were to see who would enter the best piece of knitting, needlework, or lace making, and the boys the best piece of wood carving. Many of them whittled away at the wood in their spare time, and some were becoming quite skillful. "But no one is as skillful as me," whispered Lucian to himself as he plodded home alone. "I shall win the prize, and then they will know that I can do something well, even if I am stupid at lessons, and even if no one will play with me." Lucian sang on his way home that day, and he saw himself walking up for his prize in front of that amazed school. Perhaps they would like him better after that. He would carve a horse with a flowing mane, in full gallop, with its tail outstretched and the nostrils dilated. Lucian loved horses. The old man had carved one like that, and Lucian admired it greatly. The Noah's Ark would be finished very soon, and then he would start on his little horse. He ran straight up to the old man's house to share the news. The old man was pleased, and as sure as Lucian was himself that he would win the competition. "But why try a horse?" he asked. "You could enter your Noah's Ark. It's very well done for a boy of your age." Lucian shook his head. "That's a present," he said firmly. "A present? Who for? Your little brother?" "For a little boy who's hurt himself and cannot walk." "Indeed? How did he do that?" "He fell over the ravine." "Poor little chap. How did that happen?" Lucian did not answer for a moment, but felt that this old man had become friends with him and had been so nice to him, made him want to speak the truth. He looked up at last and said, "It was my fault that he fell, and I dropped his kitten over, and he tried to get it." He could have bitten his tongue out as soon as he said it, for he felt sure the old man would hate him now and drive him away from like everyone else. But he didn't. Instead, the old man said something very gently. "So that's why you have no friends?" "Yes." "And you're hoping to make things right with this child by making this toy for him?" "Yes." "You're doing a good thing. It's a hard work to win back love, but don't give up. Those who persevere find more happiness in earning love than they do in gaining it." "I don't quite understand you," said Lucian thoughtfully. "I mean, if you spend your time putting the love of your heart into what you do for those who are not your friends, you may often be disappointed and discouraged. But if you keep on trying, you find your happiness in loving, whether you are loved back or not. You may think it strange that I, who live alone and love no one, should say all this to you, but I believe it all the same." That evening the Noah's Ark was finished. Lucian, with a flushed face and a hammering heart, set off for the Bernays chalet to leave it on his way home. When he came within sight of the chalet, he hid behind a tree in panic. What would he say? How would he break the silence? If he could see Danny alone, it would be easier, but Annette was always with him out of school hours. Surely they would forgive him when they saw the Noah's Ark, and if only they would forgive him and give him a chance, he could gladly spend the rest of his life trying to make up for it. Struggling by hope and fear, Lucian came out from behind a tree and walked towards the chalet. Annette was sitting alone outside. Lucian swallowed hard and walked up to her and held out Noah's Ark. "It's for Danny," he whispered, and the words seemed to stick in his throat. Looking down at the ground, he held up the box to Annette. "How dare you come here?" she burst out. "How dare you offer presents to Danny? Go away, and don't you ever come here again." And as she said it, she kicked Noah's Ark with all the strength of her young legs into the woodpile below her. All the little animals lay scattered on the logs. Lucian stared at her for a moment, and then he turned and ran as fast as he could. All his efforts had been for nothing. He would never be forgiven. It had all been one long waste of time. Then the old man's words came into Lucian's mind like a tiny ray of light into his angry, bitter heart. Those who keep trying find happiness in earning love than in gaining it. Perhaps this was true. He had certainly not gained anything, but at least he had been happy making the Noah's Ark and thinking of Danny's pleasure. Perhaps if he persevered and went on putting his love into his work, someday someone would accept it and love him for it. He did not know, but he decided not to give up just yet. And tomorrow we'll read chapter 11, A Trip to the High Pastures. I love you, I'm praying for you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.